Inverse functions. An inverse function exists only if f is a one-to-one function. If it's a one-to-one function, then we write the inverse like this, f to the negative 1. And we define it as f to the negative 1 of x equals y. That's if f of y equals x. X becomes the range of f, and y becomes the domain of f. In other words, the domain of the inverse will equal the range of f, and the range of the inverse will equal the domain in f. Now, how do we find the inverse? We interchange x and y, and then we solve for y. So, example 1 says find the inverse of the function. So the inverse of the function f of x equals 2x minus 3, and sketch the graph of y equals f of x and y equals the inverse of f of x on the same set of axes. Well, first of all, we'll say let y equals f of x. So we got y equals 2x minus 3. For inverse, we interchange x and y. So we end up getting x equals 2y minus 3. Now we solve for y. So we got 2y equals x plus 3, and y equals x plus 3 divided by 2. It also says to sketch it, so we better sketch it. I suppose I better write down, therefore the inverse, negative 1 of x equals x plus 3 divided by 2. So sketching it now, x-axis, y-axis. I know that this is going to be negative 3. I know that this is going to be 3 on 2. You guys know how to sketch them anyway. This one would be negative 3. And this one will be 3 on 2. Okay, I'll do one of them in green. In red, sorry. So the first one, y equals f of x, will cross at negative 3. And the x-intercept is negative 3 on 2. So that one's like that. That's y equals f of x. And in green, I'll do the inverse. And the inverse, and they will cross. Oops. There we go. And that is y equals the inverse of x. They basically have a reflection in the line y equals x, which is right there. And they do cross at a point. So to ask me for the domain and range, which we didn't get asked here, but I'll still write it down. The domain of the inverse of x is the range of f of x, which in this case is the reals, and the range of the inverse of x is the same as the domain of f of x, which in this case again is reals. You can solve for the inverse on your calculator by going to menu 3.1 and solve the equation for y. So that gives you the inverse there. Example 2 said let f such that 3 to 6, that's the domain, remember, to reals, which is the codomain of f of x equals x minus 2 squared. Find the inverse of f and state its domain and range. Okay, so remember, for inverse, we interchange x and y. And then we solve for y. So we get let y equals x over 3 squared. Therefore, we get square root of interchange x and y gives us x equals y over 3 squared. So we end up getting y over 3 equals plus and minus, because when we square root, we have to take the plus and minus, and therefore we get y equals plus or minus, it's going to be times 3, so I can write it like this. Now you can sketch it. So if you want a quick sketch, that might help you do the domain and range. Remember that the domain of the first one is 3 to 6, so that is already our range. So the domain, when x is 3, we get y equals to 1. When x is 6, we get y equal to 4. So it looks like that. That's f of x. And then the inverse swaps around, so we get 1 and 3. And then we get 4 and 6. So that's the inverse there. So the domain of the inverse equals the range of f of x. Now the range of f of x is just 1 to 4. And that's inclusive. Remember, from there to there. And the range of the inverse of x equals the domain of f of x, and that was written already up here, right there, so that's just 3 to 6. Example 3 says find the inverse of each of the following functions. So part A, well, because we want to find the inverse, these we just swap. That's all we do. So 1, 2 becomes 2, 1. That's the inverse. 3, 4 becomes 4, 3. 5, 6 becomes 6, 5. It's just the opposite, remember. And 7, 8 becomes 8, 7. Part B, if such that 1 to infinity to rules of f of x equals x minus 1 squared plus 4. So I'll just write let y equals x minus 1 squared plus 4. We're only finding the inverse. So interchange x and y for the inverse. So we get x equals y minus 1 squared plus 4. So we get y minus 1 all squared equals x minus 4. I've got to take the square root. So remember, when I take the square root, I've got to do plus and minus. But this is important. And then I've got y equals 1 plus and minus the square root of x minus 4. Now we go back to the domain, which is 1 to infinity, so that means this negative is non-existent. So really my rule, f to the inverse of x equals 1 plus the square root of x minus 4. Don't need the minus part.